Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth. Written by the Hanged Man 317 and read by Purple Star. Chapter 9. UA was huge. It loomed above and around Era, made her feel small and open and vulnerable. Grand walls and sweeping hallways wrapping her up in "don't belongs" and "not for yous." It was the kind of place she'd be sent to steal from, to murder in, to tear brick from brick until her hands were raw and bloodied by the effort of it all. She thought that coming here would make her feel excited, happy, anxious, something. Staring up the steps to the main entrance, Era just felt empty. She'd been sleeping less, if such a thing was possible, and that couldn't be helping matters. The unfamiliar uniform made her skin itch, and her backpack was heavy across her shoulders, laden down with everything she could possibly need on a first day of school. The problem was, Era had absolutely no frame of reference for what such a thing could entail. She'd at least had the presence of mind to hide her blades in little pockets of fabric, both in her bag and on her person. If they were found, it could mean a world of trouble, but honestly, Era was on the brink of a panic attack as it was, and the feeling of cool, sharp metal tucked against her skin was enough to stave it off, if only for the moment. Students milled all around her, and she let the mass of bodies carry her along through the doors, down the halls, eventually dispersing enough to deposit her in the middle of an intersection, much like the last three she'd passed. Christ, it really was going to be one of those days. Era squinted at the walls, unable to find any markers that could lead her in the right direction. There were the other students, of course, but she didn't really want to draw so much attention to herself so soon. Was that normal, to go up to strangers and ask for directions? Was that something people her age did? Or would that be rude, weird, some violation of whatever social order had been established in her absence from normal society? Holy shit, this isn't a fucking stakeout. Just ask for some goddamn directions. Era sighed, just as a flash of green caught her eye. That kid from the entrance exam, the nervous one. She'd only talked to him for maybe 10 seconds. Did she even remember his name? Midoriya? Era repressed a wince at how her voice echoed along the now near-empty hallway. The boy turned, asked at the short, brown-haired girl he was walking with. He makes friends fast. Oh, hi! God, he was so obnoxiously endearing. Midoriya gave her a little wave, and the two stopped so that Era could catch up with them. It was Suzuki, right? Just call me Era, she said without really thinking about it. Glancing past them to see if any signs outside of the classroom might give them a clue as to where they were. Midoriya seemed to get flustered, blushing and waving his hands frantically. Oh, no, I couldn't possibly.
Hi, I'm Uraraka Ochiko. It's nice to meet you. Do you and Midoriya know each other?
Fuck, she was so blinding. All bright smiles and sparkling eyes and bouncing on the balls of her feet as if she could barely contain her excitement. They would have died. Era managed to push the thought away this time. Not really. We just talked a little during the entrance exam, said Era as the three of them set out along the hallway once more. I'm looking for my class, but this place is a maze. Where are you two going?
1A,
said Uraraka cheerfully. Midoriya, it seemed, had regained his composure and was nodding along enthusiastically.
How about you?
Hero course. That tracked. Era didn't let any bitterness show in her own smile, both because she was well trained enough that she could keep such unimportant emotions from infecting her face, and more importantly because she most certainly was not bitter in the first place. 1C, she replied. They're probably close by. I think so, said Midoriya, tilting his head in thought. I looked at the map, and it seemed like all of the first-year classes are in the same general area. It's probably more convenient that way, in case they need similar resources or if the teachers are involved with more than one track. Sure. Era felt a yawn swell in her chest and forcefully slammed it back down. That all makes sense, but do you know where those classes are in relation to us? Not really? Cool. Against her better judgment, she wished Shinsou was there. That they could walk to class together, because if she had to be lost, she'd rather be with someone she actually knew. Era sighed, feeling exhaustion sap her limbs as they continued down the endless hallways. What she wanted was irrelevant. Shinsou clearly didn't want to talk, didn't want to meet, didn't want anything to do with her. The lack of texts proved that much. And she was okay with that, because that meant she was alone again. Alone was better, safer, smarter. Even the ache it left in her chest would only be temporary, she knew, and certainly trumped the alternative. The gut-wrenching pain of when she finally failed and ended up getting someone killed.
Era?
Uraraka broke through her thoughts, and Era's shoulders tensed before she forced them to relax once more. Sorry, I think I just spaced out, she said apologetically, unable to keep the wariness from slipping into her voice.
That's okay. I was just saying how crazy that test was with all the robots. Someone could have gotten seriously hurt, you know. I think Midoriya saved my life.
Midoriya gave a nervous laugh, reaching up to rub the back of his head and only further tangling the messy curls there. I'm sure you would have been fine. I didn't do much, really.
He took down the zero-pointer with one punch!
Uraraka crowed, miming her own triumphant jab in the air.
Bam!
That sounds impressive. And it did. Those things were huge. Era was so sure the endeavor would be pointless that finding it hadn't even crossed her mind. Is that what a hero would have done? There was nothing. From anyone else, that would have sounded arrogant, but in Midoriya's quiet tone and downcast eyes, Era could practically feel the self-deprecation radiating off of him in waves. She frowned. None of my business. I wouldn't call it nothing, she said in spite of herself, while Uraraka nodded enthusiastically. That sounds like quite a display of power, and you saved someone else with it. Yeah, but it broke my arm, and my legs, and I think I almost fell to my death. Midoriya shrank in on himself with every sentence, the last escaping in almost a whisper.
But it was so cool!
Protested Uraraka.
You looked so determined, and I'm sure you'll eventually be able to use your quirk like that without,
breaking all the bones in your body, said Era dryly. Well, she knew that UA would be interesting, and it wasn't disappointing so far. Your quirk breaks all the bones in your body? Not all of them, just some of them. This kid is in the hero course, and Shinsou isn't. Era impatiently shook the thought away. Shinsou didn't need or want her taking up his banner like that. Still, that's quite a liability, she muttered, forcing herself to look the boy in the eye. You'll have to learn to overcome it, somehow, if you're incapacitated after one blow. To her surprise, his expression turned from something small and nervous and weak to something that blazed with determination. A set to his features that had her rethinking every interaction she'd had with the kid. I know, he said simply. And I will. Well, that was that, she supposed. Era nodded and faced forward once again, feeling the brief moment of tension rise into the air and dissipate. Their conversation turning towards inane small talk and gossip and opinions on the next big feature film.
Oh, here we are,
said Uraraka at last, stopping at a large doorway. Midoriya brightened, gesturing down the hall.
I think general education is down that way. If I'm remembering the maps correctly. It shouldn't be too far. I hope you're not late because of us. Sorry if...
Thank you for walking with me, said Era, desperate to cut him off. She gave them both a tired smile. I'm not sure I would have been able to find it on my own. That was a lie. They'd pretty much just walked in a straight line from where she'd intercepted them. But it did make the future heroes puff up with pride and satisfaction. They were easily manipulated, she realized. Just give them a situation in which they could help, could be of use, could ease some pain or hardship, and they would stumble over themselves to become involved. Even if it was a lie, a trap, a play to snare them up in their own good intentions. Era left them to their classroom, feeling those thoughts settle in her chest, even as she struggled to dismiss them. She couldn't be thinking this right now. She didn't know much about people her age, but she was fairly certain that they didn't have ideas like that. Hopefully, not all heroes were so naive, and UA would be able to teach them some restraint. That was the only thing that kept her chest from growing tight, her throat from closing up, her hands from trembling as she opened the door to Class 1C. It was loud. She blinked, not quite knowing what she expected, but certainly not expecting this. Students sat in chairs, leaned on desks, stood by each other and talked animatedly about who knew what. Introductions flew across the room, quickly followed by opinions on everything from cats to music to the latest big villain attack. Again, Era was struck by the mundanity of it all. The carefree way these students swapped information about themselves and their opinions, as if there was nothing to hide and nothing big to be gained by hiding it. She stepped out of the doorway and began to look for a seat, catching sight of an unoccupied desk behind. Oh, right. Shinsou was in this class. Of course. He wasn't looking at her, instead seeming to take the opportunity to catch a few minutes of precious sleep. Era couldn't sit behind him, even as a little voice at the back of her mind screamed coward and hypocrite. He didn't want to talk to her, and she wasn't going to impose. His quirk had nothing to do with it. There were a couple other free desks, and so Era settled down near the front, next to a window. It made her feel a little bitter, gave her the illusion of a quick escape. Though if things got so bad that she was jumping out of windows, Era wasn't sure that a quick escape would be enough to save her. Damn, she really was in a sunny mood this morning, wasn't she? Luckily, there wasn't much time to dwell on it, because as soon as she sat down, the classroom door slammed open, and Era could only barely keep herself from startling as the real, actual present mic burst into the room.
Hello, listeners! Ready to get this rockin' school year started? Can I get a yeah?
I'm going to be deaf by the end of this year. Era winced, feeling sharp pinpricks in her ears where she could feel the cells in her cochlea already jumping to mend themselves back together. Distracting, but not concerning. The one time she'd been to a concert, she'd felt much the same. Bass thrumming in her sternum, ears tingling with the constant, shifting repairs, hands growing slick with blood as she jammed a knife into her mark's kidney. Okay, well, not exactly the same. When Present Mike, the actual Present Mike who was there in their homeroom class, what the fuck, discovered that he was not going to get a yeah, he seemed to take it in stride, strolling up to his desk and leaning against it with a blinding smile. Fuck, is everyone here so goddamn bright? Era resisted the urge to wince. Maybe that's why I couldn't be a hero. I'm not bright enough. Again, she was forced to slam these thoughts down, shove them in a box and shove that box far back into the corner of her mind. The shocked silence that seized upon the classroom suddenly broke its hold, and Era was assaulted by the chorus of excited murmurings from behind her, harsh whispers that were loud enough to be spoken normally, fluttering of hands and fidgeting of legs, as everyone realized they were about 10 feet away from a pro hero, and a bit of a celebrity pro to boot. Even Era allowed herself a moment to be impressed, excited, and a little confused, all before she shoved those feelings away. Unnecessary and dangerous, liable to leave her distracted. Present Mike. Pro-hero radio show personality, darling of his fans, Present Mike, was a target. Killing him meant taking out a small, but integral part of heroics, meant dealing a blow to both hero fans and heroes themselves, meant ripping the heart from hero society. Obviously, killing one of the elusive top 10 would be more destructive, but lacking whatever feat of strength or ingenuity that accomplishment would require, killing Present Mike would suffice. The warm taste of copper wormed its way onto her tongue, and her nails were dug into her thighs, tight enough to bruise, to bleed. Breathe. Era closed her eyes and did, slackening her muscles, loosening her jaw, releasing whatever hold her teeth had claimed upon the inside of her cheek. This was supposed to be general education, so why the fuck was a pro-hero teaching their class? That's UA for you. Great, just fucking great. She was going to get found out and hunted down and imprisoned, and then she would just be a sitting duck for... If you're going to spiral like this every time you see a pro, you should just drop out of UA now. Breathe. Era did, even though the tightness of her chest made the air burn. Present Mike had finished talking, and was instead beaming at the class before him. God, had she missed everything he'd said? How she'd even managed that was a testament to the power of a good panic attack, she supposed. Although he certainly wasn't as loud as he'd been on first entering, so that might have had something to do with it. The boy behind her was talking about where he lived, the name of his pet, why he'd wanted to come to UA. Present Mike prompted him with a question or a tilt of his head, all while wearing a soft, encouraging smile. Oh, so they were doing introductions then. Shit. The boy sat down and all eyes were on Era. Oh, shit. This was why emotions, absent thoughts, the loose pieces of her brain that tended to rattle when shaken up too fiercely, all of that was weakness. No situational awareness, an inability to prepare for whatever was coming her way, and... oh no, she needed to get up or she would start to look weird. Era breathed, deeply, pushing back her chair and standing up as straight as she dared, straddling the line between weak and confrontational, a standout student and a troubled kid who needed extra attention. She couldn't afford any extremes, couldn't afford to draw attention one way or the other, especially when it seemed that their homeroom teacher was a pro-fucking hero. Hi, my name is Suzuki Era, she said brightly, forcing a friendly smile upon her face, even though it pinched awkwardly at the edges of her skin. I'm looking forward to attending UA with you all. Was that too much? Not enough? Just right? Did she sound too enthusiastic? Or perhaps too bland? Fuck. It would really help if she had some sort of baseline. But honestly, she was lucky to snap out of it when she did. What if she'd still been mid-breakdown when he'd called her name? Era supposed she'd take what she could get.
That's rad, Suzuki!
He sounded so genuine, even with that no doubt fake radio host persona, that Era was able to keep her face from twisting into a scowl. Fake names never sat quite right with her. Even before her failure and ultimate demotion, she was Era. That was her name, and she would cling to it desperately when others tried to rip it away. But normal people had two names, so Suzuki would do.
Can you tell the rest of our listeners what drew you to our little school?
Mike prompted, and Era realized that she'd been standing in silence for just a sliver past conventional. She laughed, pleased when it didn't come out all tangled up like it sometimes did. UA's one of the top schools in Japan. How could I not apply? I'm just excited to be here, and for the opportunity to get the best education out there.
Great answer!
crowd mic, and for a ridiculous moment, Era felt a surge of pride swell in her chest, a sense of accomplishment. "It's not real praise," she admonished herself sternly, wishing she could physically tear apart whatever pitiful part of her still reacted this way. "It's just a part of his act." Thankfully, he didn't ask her any more questions, and Era managed to sit down without collapsing into her chair. Okay, she could do this. He was just a teacher here. It's not like he was expecting to sniff out a villain in his classroom. She could fly under the radar, stay safe and tucked away behind the heroes, even get that quality education she'd been spouting bullshit about. She just needed to fucking hold it together. Era had infiltrated rival gangs, crashed parties staffed by armed guards, lied through her teeth to men who could kill her with a wave of a hand. And this was what was giving her trouble? A high school? No, she would not allow it. After the initial introductions, the class went on as normal, or, well, what Era assumed was normal for a high school classroom. There was still that shock of, "Holy shit, it's present, Mike!" simmering about the students, but it had cooled down enough that everything was able to run smoothly. Their homeroom teacher was kind, patient, and surprisingly thoughtful. Fortunately, it seemed that his voice wasn't actually at that constant, deafening volume. Instead, it ebbed and swelled, rising to feverish points of excitement, and falling to quiet, pondering introspections. He spoke like every word he'd ever said was part of a long, endless song that wrapped itself around the twists and turns of his life. Or maybe Era was just sleep-deprived, and he talked like a normal fucking human being. That was always a possibility. The problem was, no matter how thoughtful he was, he still needed to call on Era to answer a question once in a while. And Era, without fail, was unable to provide a satisfactory answer. She supposed, as she sat down for the third time, with ears burned red, and that familiar knot in her chest, that this was just the universe having yet another laugh at her expense. Of course she wouldn't be able to answer any questions. That was what she'd been taught, after all. Never cave, never cry, never tell them anything they want to know, even if they threaten to pry it from your lips. That lesson really shouldn't apply to algebra, though. Era raked a hand through her hair, squinting at the board and trying desperately to force those numbers into some kind of sense. All to no avail. Worst of all, she could feel Shinsou's gaze from the back of the classroom. Feel the smug judgment that she was sure he felt at her struggling again and again to tackle problems he'd certainly solved 10 minutes ago. Finally, they finished whatever ungodly introductory assessment their homeroom class was being subjected to and were sent packing off to the gym, presumably for physical education of some kind. This Era could do. Her fingers twitched with nervous energy, limbs eager to bend and push against the limits of her body. A smile pushed at her lips, and she allowed it to stay. The students of 1C were ushered to the locker rooms, splitting off to get changed into their gym uniforms. Era's smile fell. Though she'd been a lot more careful in recent days, there were still too many scars for her liking, all stark and ugly against her skin. Most notable and the least easily explained away were the bullet wounds ripping through her arms, her legs, scattered across her torso in various states of repair. The slash of a knife was usually a quick heal. Unless it nicked an artery, then she was in for a nasty bruise. But though her body was much better at handling infection than most, there were some puncture wounds that had begun to fester without the proper care. Era was pretty sure that the sight of darkened veins and oozing gashes would be sickening to most, and certainly inspire a dangerous and unnecessary level of concern in others. She tried to snag a bathroom stall, holding back a frustrated snarl when they were all filled up before she could reach them. Evidently, normal teenage girls also did not want their peers to see them naked. Shocker, that. tapping her foot against the impressively pristine bathroom tile. Era glanced back across the locker room to find it already half emptied. Another scowl threatened to spill out onto her face, because it was just her luck, wasn't it? Everyone else, it seemed, knew how to change quickly enough not to be a nuisance, but those in the stalls were taking their sweet time. At last, a door swung open, and Era bit back a sigh as she slid into the stall and rapidly slipped into her gym uniform, wasting no time in marveling at the make and material that only a school like UA could afford for its students. Bursting out of the stall, Era found herself in an empty locker room. Curses rose to the front of her mind, and were discarded one by one as she shoved her school uniform away, and hurried to join her classmates where they were all gathered around a tall, muscular woman with black hair tied neatly back into a tight bun. The woman was staring out across the class, blazing red eyes narrowed as she spoke.
Thought we were supposed to have 23 students. Ah, you there. Since you're last, will you do us all the honor of assisting me in this presentation?
Oh dear God, what have I done to deserve this? A lot. She had done a lot to deserve this. Era pointed to herself silently and tilted her head, because fuck it if she didn't at least attempt to weasel her way out of this.
Yes, you,
said the woman, crossing her arms.
Get up here.
So much for staying out of the spotlight, she supposed. Era affixed her most apologetic smile to her face as she wove through the crowd, coming to stand straight back before this woman and letting her hands hang loose at her sides. She'd have to play this right or things could get dangerous. Obviously, this wasn't going to be a normal gym class if they needed a demonstration. Not to mention the clear combat training of the woman in front of her. Relaxed stance, callous knuckles, crooked nose. There was a surety to her actions that spoke of experience. But this was fucking UA, so of course they'd hire the best.
Name?
Their gym teacher barked. Again, Era was forced to repress her scowl.
Suzuki Era.
She managed to bite out, and, oh dear, this was unraveling fast, wasn't it? Pick a mask and stick to it. Hold it tight. Don't let it chatter. She was Suzuki Era. She was a student of UA, and she was obnoxiously average. That was her.
Suzuki?
The woman said it with a certain boredom, a disinterest that rankled at Era for reasons she couldn't quite discern.
Well, I am Onishi, and I will be teaching you all basic self-defense.
Basic, sensei? Era matched that boredom, fought to keep it from straying into disrespect. Onishi's eyes snapped towards her with a burning intensity, and immediately Era knew that she'd failed.
Unless that is too simple for you. Would you prefer an advanced lesson?
Fucking hell. This woman was unsettling. If this was a gym teacher for 1C, who the fuck was teaching the hero students? Across the school grounds, a child wails as he's sent home on the first day. His teacher looks on with cold indifference. Era hastily dipped into a bow, gritting her teeth when she was sure no one could see her before straightening back up again. My apologies, Onishi-sensei. I did not mean to speak out of turn. From across the sea of staring eyes, Era was sure she could feel a pair of purple eyes boring into her back. She steadfastly ignored it.
Humph.
Onishi brought her fists up, and Era tried to ignore the way her muscles tensed, how her legs swept behind her to give her a more solid stance, how her weight sank into her back foot so she might run away if need be. She'd been with enough senseis to know that she should expect pain, the swift and brutal kind. Onishi's eyes only narrowed further, the red of her irises sparking to an even greater intensity, if such a thing were possible.
I see you have training, then. Perhaps you will not be the best example. Return to your classmates, and I will pick someone else.
What? Era felt as if the air had been squeezed straight from her lungs, her muscles buzzing with an energy that threatened to burn her from the inside out, now that it had nowhere to go. She blinked, nodded, and walked back into the crowd of students. ignoring how her hands trembled, and her mind swam and her ribs ached with the half-remembered imprint of steel-tipped boots.
You there, then, in the back, with the purple hair. Yes, I'm talking to you. Get up here.
Shinsou strolled up to the front of the class, and Era thought she was imagining it when she thought he tried to catch her eye, keeping her own gaze steady, because he doesn't want to talk to me and I don't deserve to talk to him. And it was easy. It was far too easy. It was a lucky thing that Era already had plenty of experience with punching people, because she didn't pay much mind to Onishi's demonstration. They split up into pairs, Shinsou staying with Onishi due to their odd number. On any other day, Era would feel a pang of sympathy for his obvious displeasure at this arrangement, but today she could only be thankful that it meant she wouldn't have to be paired with either of them. Instead, she found herself with a mousy, unassuming girl, whose name she couldn't even remember from their morning introductions. Fuck, if only Era could be like this kid. Whether her inability to remain inconspicuous was a testament to her own neglected acting skills, or just shitty luck, she would never know. The girl smiled shyly, giving her a meek little bow, before they both settled into the routine that Onishi had mandated. Era side-eyeing the other groups to catch up with whatever she had missed. It was pretty simple. Punch, block, counter, repeat. Eager to make up for her past failings and live by her new partner's example, Era didn't put too much effort into the task, instead falling into an easy routine and letting her mind wander, her gaze roam, her thoughts slip into something that could be rest, if you squinted. It was nice for something to finally come so naturally to her. Nice to be able to take a breather for once, to sit back and just lose herself in the natural motion. The swing of her arms through the pattern of punch, block, punch, block. The dull impact of her arms that wasn't quite enough to bruise, but was beginning to ache in a way that was most satisfying. The sound of Era's name broke her out of the fugue, had her head snapping a degree to the side as her focus sharpened to a fine point.
The Suzuki girl? Really?
That was Onishi-sensei, and out of the corner of her eye, Era could see that the woman had stood up straight from where she was running through the form with Shinsou.
Yeah, we used to practice together. She taught me pretty much everything.
His voice seemed to twist around the words unnaturally, and even from where she stood, Era could see a wrinkle in his nose as he spoke. But why? Why the fuck was he telling her that?
That's quite impressive. As I said, your form is very good for a beginner. You're positive that she was your only teacher?
I'm pretty sure I'd remember if there was anyone else,
Shinsou said lazily, and Era would have snorted, would have laughed, would have winced for fear of their sensei's reaction because... Never talk back. No matter what, you never talk back. But she was too distracted with a, why the fuck are you talking? Stop talking. Stop talking now. Her partner was eyeing her with poorly concealed concern now, and Era wrenched her thoughts away from that waiting precipice, and desperately tried to ground herself in the familiar motions of punch, block, But where before she could sink into the push and pull of her limbs, now all she felt was the tightening of her chest, the tensing of her shoulders, the tug at her ankles, and screamed, "Run away, run away, run away."
I hope you all have those basics down. We will continue on to more advanced techniques next class. Dismissed.
This time Era avoided getting bogged down by the post-class gossip and the students who loitered to make friends with their partners, managing to grab a bathroom stall and change back into her uniform before most students had even entered the locker room. Plenty of time to corner Shinsou and demand to know what the fuck he was thinking, spilling all her secrets like that. He was easy to find, wild purple hair sticking out even in a crowd like UA's, with its eclectic assortment of quirks. It seemed he also wasn't too interested in staying behind to make friends, because Era intercepted him a ways down the empty hallway. already heading towards the cafeteria where she stepped into his path. They both stared at each other, Era with an ill-disguised tension humming through her veins, and Shinsou with his customary bored expression, only marred by the quirk of a single eyebrow when the silence persisted. They'd played this game before. Era always won. At last, Shinsou huffed, staring past Era into the hallway beyond.
"Something you want?"
he asked coldly. What the fuck was that? There was more heat to her voice than she'd intended, and Era hurriedly reined in whatever festering emotion simmered beneath her skin, eager to burst forth. Shinsou narrowed his eyes.
"Excuse me? You know what I'm talking about." "I really don't."
"You're—" Era gestured wildly, frustration sticking to the words in her throat, before she nearly gave up on them altogether, instead jabbing a finger towards his chest, which he looked down at bemusedly. "Don't talk about me behind my back."
"What?"
"I heard you," she hissed. "You were telling Onishi-sensei all about me." He looked back up at her, face wrinkled up in confusion that she knew was just a very convincing mask.
"She was saying she liked my technique, so I just told her you taught me how to fight?"
"Exactly."
"Let me get this straight."
A dangerous undercurrent swelled beneath his voice, his confusion threatening to topple towards anger.
"This is the first time you've decided to talk to me in weeks, and it's because you're mad at me for complimenting you, or giving you credit for something you did?"
Is that what he really thought? That he was doing her a fucking favor? Talking her up to their teacher? No, she thought as her hands tightened to fists at her side. There was no way he could be that stupid. Playing dumb. You don't spill other people's secrets. Everyone knew those rules, respected them, unless you wanted to make an enemy with the utmost efficiency. Still, Era breathed, felt her hands spasm open from where they'd been digging crescents into her palms. Forced her voice flat as she looked Shinsou dead in the eye. "Don't talk about me. To anyone. Do whatever you want, but leave me out of it." A strange expression flashed across Shinsou's face, quickly overtaken by his usual indifference as he shouldered past her.
"Fine, I'll just forget you exist. Would that make you happy?"
"I'm never happy." Era let the thought fester in her chest, before she tucked it into a box and shoved that box towards the back of her mind. She watched Shinsou's retreating back for longer than was probably wise, before slowly making her way towards the cafeteria. Something was bound to go right today. Hopefully the lunch at UA was adequate, or she really would start to think she was cursed. End of Chapter 9.